intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We are coming down to the end of 2017. This broadcast and tomorrow's broadcast are the only two, so that's one of the reasons we encourage you to go to the website and notice that we do have a matching challenge. And if you've been waiting to the last days, well, these are the last days. We're going to spend some time in just a little bit talking about how to get ready for 2018. Mary DeMuth will be with us by phone as we talk about her book, Jesus Every Day, Prayers to Awaken Your Soul. Oftentimes we have, as we come to the first day of January, an opportunity to maybe have some resolutions and some changes. I know a lot of people are going to show up at various fitness clubs and get those. There are individuals that have New Year's resolutions. This is one we'll talk about. She has put together a book that has 366 prayers, one for every day, and I think they are so well done that that will be something I think you will appreciate. And I wanted you to know about it a few days ahead of time in case you wanted to get a copy of the book and start off your 2018 in the right way. We'll also, in the second hour, have Gene McGuire in studio. Fascinating book here, Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption, forward by Greg Laurie. There have been a number of people, including Greg Laurie, that have encouraged me to get a copy of the book. So I did, and we wanted to have him in studio. I think you're really going to enjoy that incredible testimony of a man who was incarcerated for a murder he did not commit, and after around numbers 3+ decades, was able to leave. And so we'll talk about that. And yet, no bitterness, a great opportunity for him to have found the Lord in the prisons and all sorts of other issues that we'll talk about. But just before we get into some of these kind of broader issues, I did want to talk about a few things happening in the news. I happened to run into Kelly Shackelford in the parking garage at another facility where I was, and he said that a decision came down on the Kleins, which I thought was appropriate since my commentary today is about Jack Phillips. So if you'll permit me for just a minute, we're going to talk about the cake stories again. And first of all, let's talk about this one. Their particular case is in Oregon. It has not gone to the Supreme Court, but could. And it's, again, the case involving Aaron and Melissa Klein of Sweet Cakes. And it turns out that even though First Liberty has actually represented them, this was a court decision, not that it surprised them a great deal, that ruled against the Kleins and thus upheld a decision that was made by the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries that resulted in a $135,000 penalty and really led to the closure of that family-run business. Kelly Shackelford, in a press release I have in front of me here, says freedom of expression for ourselves should require freedom of expression for others. Today, the Oregon Court of Appeals decided that Aaron and Melissa Klein are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech. In a diverse and pluralistic society, people of goodwill should be able to peacefully coexist with different beliefs. He said, we are disappointed the court ruled against the Kleins. And interestingly enough, they did, at least in one case, remove what was called the gag rule. And that is something that might be helpful because now they can tell their story. And as before, this was so draconian that not only did it exact a $135,000 penalty and essentially close down the family bakery, but it also said you couldn't talk about it either. Well, at least that has been removed, and we'll see where that takes it in the future. Now, in just a few minutes, I also want to read from a piece that came out today in National Review, and it is written by Kevin Williamson, and it has to do with the case, obviously, out of Colorado, which is the one kind of in the news, and he's really raising the question of how far down, if you will, this slippery slope we want to go. Because as my commentary today points out, even after the Supreme Court heard this case by Jack Phillips, and we won't get a decision till June. We understand that. We also have Wesley J. Smith, which we'll probably get on in the future, to say that not only will this ruling from the Supreme Court probably affect bakers and florists and photographers, it could affect a lot of people in the medical field. And so if you haven't been able to get a copy of my commentary today, it's in the Viewpoints commentary section called Cakes and Bioethics, because Wesley J. Smith believes that it could have an impact on what are called medical conscience rights. He says the law generally protects medical conscience in areas of abortion and assisted suicide, although not pharmacists dispensing contraception. But those protections are under intellectual assault and bioethics in preparation for eventual attempts to change the law. And so the idea is that this would be a so-called patients' rights issue, and this would then actually supersede any moral or religious convictions that an individual might have. That would mean that the doctor or the nurse must perform an abortion, must actually be involved in assisted physician suicide and things of that nature. And according to this new approach, he says, healthcare workers and nurses and doctors and others either would have to comply or leave the profession. That's the argument being made right now by Ezekiel Emanuel. If that last name sounds familiar, well, he's the brother of the mayor of Chicago. But you might remember Ezekiel Emanuel, somebody we mentioned on this program many times when we were having a discussion about the Affordable Care Act, because he was really sort of the architect. He was one of the people instrumental in bringing that about today, which is oftentimes referred to as Obamacare. Well, anyway, Ezekiel Emanuel in the New England Journal of Medicine argued that doctors who do not wish to perform elective procedures accepted by the medical establishment have two choices. Either they can find an area of medical practice, such as maybe radiology, where their moral views will not be challenged. Otherwise, they need to get out of medicine altogether. And if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that one of the things I've pointed out is that if this is a ruling that goes the wrong way, and it could be just a very narrow ruling just on Jack Phillips, but if it goes the wrong way and is applied broadly, it might imply that Christians that have any kind of orthodox views about a variety of issues are going to have to start thinking about certain professions they could not actually go into because they would actually find that that would contradict their kind of ideas and their religiously held convictions. And so that's something that a lot of people are starting to think about. But Kevin Williamson also points out that somewhere along the line, we've got to ask ourselves, how far do we want to go? It's not that we're talking about discrimination that's like it was, say, in the 1930s under Jim Crow laws. You know, it's very different telling a black man, as he said, who could not work in the bank because he's black. That's very different than telling a same-sex couple that you'd be happy to sell them cupcakes or cookies or pecan pies, but you do not bake cakes for same-sex weddings. And he says, you know, if we head down the road of not having any limiting principle, then what he said is, Masterpiece Cake Shop, the slope is, in fact, very slippery. And even ends by reminding us that if you start thinking about that, well, then even the air that you're breathing is regulated by the EPA, the bakery customers that travel on public roads, and on and on and on. You've just going to see that somewhere along the line there needs to be what we would call a limiting principle. So again, this decision coming today down from Oregon, which is one of the decisions that will be obviously appealed by First Liberty, is not good for Aaron and Melissa Klein. And, of course, my commentary today is about Jack Phillips. That case is before the Supreme Court. They probably have already decided how they're going to rule and have already decided how they're going to write some of those opinions, but we won't hear those probably until June. So, again, you might want to get my commentary today. A little bit later, we'll also talk about a very good piece by David French. Can America survive as a post-Christian nation? We'll have that conversation, but first we're going to have a chance to talk with Mary DeMuth about her new book, Jesus Every Day. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, a few months from now, we will know how the Supreme Court will rule in the Colorado cake case involving Jack Phillips. In previous commentaries, I've talked about how this case will certainly have some influence on cases involving bakers, florists, and photographers. Wesley J. Smith, in a recent column, says it will also affect people in the medical field. He believes that it could have an impact on medical conscience rights. He says that the law generally protects medical conscience in the areas of abortion and assisted suicide, though not pharmacists dispensing contraception. But those protections are under intellectual assault in bioethics in preparation for eventual attempts to change the law. People who want to reduce or eliminate medical conscience rights want to replace them with a patient rights approach to health care. In other words, if a medical procedure is legal, then the doctor or nurse must provide the procedure. It wouldn't matter if the doctor or the nurse had a moral or religious objection. According to those who want this new approach to health care, nurses and doctors who cannot comply need to leave the profession. Ezekiel Emanuel was instrumental in crafting the Affordable Care Act, now known as Obamacare. He said as much in the New England Journal of Medicine. He argued that doctors who do not wish to perform elective procedures accepted by the medical establishment have two choices. They can find an area of medical practice where their moral views will not be challenged, otherwise they need to get out of medicine altogether. In the oral arguments in the Colorado baker case, one of the justices suggested the same thing. If you can't bake a cake for a same-sex ceremony, you need to get out of the baking business. These two statements remind us that we are moving into an era when government officials won't even try to accommodate a person's religious convictions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, let me encourage you to start off 2018 in a positive way and really begin to think about how you would pray each day and how you would read God's Word each day. This is the time when I think many of you make New Year's resolutions and begin to evaluate your physical health and your emotional health and, most importantly, your spiritual health. So one of the books I wanted to bring to you today is this new book out. It's published by Harvest House. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link on our website here, pointofview.net, so that you could either order it in paperback or, of course, if you get it in Kindle, you'll have it instantaneously, and that might be the best way to have it carried around with you in your laptop or your phone so that you can turn to it every single day. And this is really a collection of 366 prayers on a variety of different topics. We're going to get into that in just a minute. Prayers to Awaken Your Soul, Jesus Every Day, A Journey Through the Bible in 1 Year. And the author is certainly no stranger to Point of View. She's been on the program with us for many years. Mary DeMuth, of course, as we'll talk about, has certainly a reason to have written some of these books because we've talked about sexual assault. We've talked about the way in which she really is helping you develop a re-story of your life. She's the author of 32 different books. Some of these are fiction books, which I would recommend to you. Some have to do with parenting. Some have to do with your Christian life. Certainly a whole series of books that you need to know about. And again, you can click on her website and find out more as well. She has 3 amazing young adults and is the wife of 25 years to Patrick, was involved in planting a church in France. Actually, I think I first met her when they came back to the United States, and she wrote a book about this postmodern culture. And Mary, welcome back to Point of View.
It is so great to hear your voice, Kerby. I hope all is well in your corner of the world.
Well, and we are going to see if we can make it better for everybody, because as we talk about some of these prayers, this is really important. And before we get into the specifics, because I want to focus on a few that I thought were kind of interesting, talk about how you put this together, because a lot of people are going to want to get a copy of this book. Either you can get it in paperback. I've suggested Kindle, because then it's on your phone or it's on your iPad, and then you can pull it up every day when you want a new prayer or you want to focus on a particular issue. You can also do a search for maybe something that would be more appropriate for that day. But talk about how you put this together.
Yeah, so you mentioned us coming back from France, and we were church planters there. And while I was there, I had an email distribution list that I would just send prayer updates to people who are financially supporting us and praying for us. And I started the habit when I got back to the States, where I asked at the end of every newsletter, do you mind if I pray for you? And then I would pray for people by name. I would insert their name into the prayer. And that's been going on for almost 10 years. So people have been asking me, even sending me mail in the physical, in the mailbox, that has asked me to write a book of my prayers. And so this has been kind of a long journey. I thought of the concept about 2-3 years ago and shopped it around, and it finally found a home. I'm so grateful for Harvest House for accepting it. And so, this is what my readers have been asking for a long time, and I pray for you in this book every single day for a year.
Well, and again, one of the things that I have noticed is on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, I'll see times when you're driving and praying and sitting and praying and things of that nature, so people can actually participate in that as well. But let's, if we can, maybe talk about a few of those. One of those that people always use in terms of your introduction is if you met Mary DeMuth today, her joy would confuse you because, of course, you have been through a great deal of tragedy. And you've written about that in so many eloquent ways. But talk about that for just a minute. I know most of our listeners may know your story, but for few that don't, when you come to the chapter and the particular section on joy, it has even more meaning because I know of your background story.
Yeah, so I didn't grow up with a lot of joy, and definitely had a childhood I didn't want to duplicate as an adult with my own children, and experienced parents with drug addiction and creation and neglect, and I was sexually abused when I was 5 from some neighborhood boys, death of a parent, several divorces, and so on my mom's side she had several divorces, and so I just had this really incomplete and broken childhood where I just was longing for a father to love me. And so thankfully, at 15 years old, I heard the gospel through the ministry of Young Life and met Jesus then. And he really did become that central figure in my life, that daddy, that Abba Father that I had been longing for all of my life because I was just so broken.
Well, and again, joy is one of the topics that you address there. And it seems to me that joy should not be tied to happiness or your circumstances, but joy, for example, in the book of Philippians, written from a jail, illustrates once again, even in God's Word, that we can have joy even in the midst of what would be, from a world's point of view, very difficult and tragic circumstances.
It's true, and I actually just had this challenge I did for myself where I read through the whole Bible in 2 months chronological. I'm almost done with that. And one of the things I found was looking at even Paul when he was in jail, and that he was singing praise songs in the midst of that. It's just so ironic. And that, I think, is how our lives become infectious to others, and how others see Jesus in us, is when we do have joy in the midst of terrifying or frustrating or worrisome circumstances. If we can sing a praise song in the midst of a jail cell, then we will have kind of made it, so to speak, in terms of our discipleship and our spiritual growth.
Well, and again, having traveled now once to Greece, I've been to Israel twice, but going to Greece and actually standing at one point where they think the prison was, where they're singing. Don't think the modern prison here. Don't think of something where you have a place to sit or that it's somewhat roomy. I mean, it's just a pretty bleak place, and it, I think, brought home to me even more having joy in the midst of a circumstance that would be so dire for some of us. Let me go to day 51, because you have a prayer there about fear. And Mary, one of the things I run into are a lot of people fearful. They're fearful about how their kids are going to turn out. They're fearful about the economic circumstances we have, or just sort of this low-level fear because, you just never know when there'll be a terrorist attack, never know when something's going to happen. And here, again, one of the reasons you address that issue is because, again, that is something that we see as part of the human condition, and we need to begin to pray in that particular way, don't we?
We do. And what I have found as I have, just kind of prayed through the scriptures, and that's essentially what we're doing in this book. We're going through the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation in order, and we're praying the scriptures. But what I've found that when we fear, it's because we're probably serving another god or another idol. So we're worshiping the idol of control. And when things are out of control, then we fear, or we run to something other than God when we're afraid or fearful. And that's something I'm really praying about right now in my own life is, what am I running to when I'm afraid? What do I jump to automatically? Do I, eat a chocolate bar or do I pray? Do I complain about it or do I pray? Do I just spend hours fretting or do I pray or do I ask God for help? And so this is something that I've just been kind of personally working on lately.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation today. Let me just mention we've got some great resources here, and I would really encourage you to act on it today. We've got, first of all, a link to marydemuth.com, so you can find out about all sorts of books, and I would also encourage you to consider this next year. Maybe you'd like to have her come and speak, or maybe you'd like to have some of the resources that you could make available at a men's ministry, a woman's ministry, or something of that nature. So first of all, we have that link available to you. Then we also have a link that you can, of course, it'll just take you to Amazon, but you can find it as well. And that is the paperback book is not that expensive, or of course the Kindle's even cheaper, and I would encourage you to get it. Now, it may be in your local bookstore because it's just come out, Harvest House, so look for it there, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to get a copy of this and to really start your year off appropriately with prayer every single day. And as she points it out, it really takes you from Genesis to Revelation as you go through the year, so you'll begin to find some wonderful prayer ideas in some of these books that maybe you haven't spent a lot of time on, like Habakkuk or Micah or things of that nature. So I think you're really going to enjoy that. And while we're going to a break, let me just also mention that we are coming to the end of 2017. As I look at our matching challenge clock, it's clicking away every second, and that means that the opportunity for you to join with us is beginning to fade away. So if you have not taken the time to join with us, we need a year-end gift from you, and we have now a $65,000 matching challenge. So the first thing you could do is go to the website, as you're already getting some of the material from Mary DeMuth and the book Jesus Every Day, and click on that button and make a gift. And your gift will be doubled. $100 becomes $200, $200 becomes $400. And more importantly, we also would encourage you to maybe even leave a note. We'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to talk to someone, maybe you don't have a computer and you just like to call somebody up and talk to somebody on staff, that number is 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. If you'd like to send a check, well, send it to Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Send it today so you have a good postmark on it. We'll be back right after this.
In the early 1980s, Jim was moved to help women in crisis. The work was hard, but Point of View was there.
Marlon Maddox really provided the example of what could take place when the average individual in the pew stepped forward and used their God-given gifts and talents, as the Good Samaritan did, just to help somebody in need. There was a transformation that really did take place from just being upset about a problem to actively doing something tangible and real about solving the problem.
Your investment in Point of View shapes hearts and minds across the nation, encouraging more Jims to ask God's help to do great things. Shaping a hope-filled future begins with your gift today, a gift that will be matched, doubled, up to $65,000. Be a key to transformation in 2018. Please give at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Mary DeMuth. By the way, if you'd like to join us, I suspect this is one way you to sit back and listen, but if you'd like to, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the book for just a few more minutes, Jesus Every Day, A Journey Through the Bible in 1 Year, Prayers to Awaken Your Soul. And the reason we were wanting to focus on this is this next year, which is just a few days around the corner, is an opportunity to start off in Genesis with the first prayer and take you all the way through the end, 366 prayers to the book of Revelation. So I think you will really appreciate this book. We have an opportunity for you to order it online. And if you would like to get it in Kindle, that may be a good way to just carry it with you on your iPhone or your iPad or your text device, whatever you might have. But otherwise, of course, it's on paperback as well, and we have it on our website, pointofview.net. You can perhaps also find it in your local bookstore. It's published by Harvest House, and I think you will really appreciate the time and effort that Mary has put into it. Mary, as I mentioned, it goes through chronologically, and so I wanted to go to day 151, which is praise. And the first thing I wanted to do is to say, you know, when we came to the topic of praise, I would have, for sure, before I read the book, thought that that would be something that would come from one of the Psalms. But instead, as people, if they get the book, will see, you actually use a passage in Daniel chapter 2 on praise. So I think it illustrates the fact that sometimes when we're looking for verses relating to praise or we're talking about praise hymns, we almost always go to the Psalms, but we can see other examples of praise in other parts of Scripture, can't we?
We can, and that's what one of my desires is just to acquaint people or reacquaint them with the breadth of Scripture and the depth of it and how beautiful it is and the harmony of it all. And that's why I wanted to kind of take them on this journey from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And so that's my heart. The other thing I did just to kind of help people who are like me, where they start something January 1st and by January 12th, they're like way behind and frustrated. This is just listed day 1, day 2, day 3. Right. So if you skip 5 days, you can just go to day 2 and there's no guilt and there's only joy.
And what I like about it is I suspect that some of us, frankly, will jump around. There may be some things that I would want to read, and I'm not going to wait till October to read it if I think I need it in February, for example. That's one of the advantages, again, like I said, if you've got something like a Kindle or something like that, because then you can actually do a search and say, I wonder if they've got anything on, praise, or whether she's maybe got something on in terms of sin or mercy or, whatever it might be, and you can find those much quicker. So that's another one. Again, I'm just picking out a few that were of interest to me. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the cross. And so, of course, on day 207, Matthew 16, but you use that not just to remind us about the cross and what Jesus did for us, but also to, in a sense, be willing to break the things you want me to bear, you say. If it means suffering, give me a new theology of suffering. If it is sacrifice, remind me that you walked before me and your Holy Spirit will truly enable me to act rightly. If it is serving unseen, bring joy while I perform for an audience of one. The cross speaks death, but it is an avenue to life. And so this one reminds me also of your prayer that you had there for humility, because it's really easy to say, well, I want to be humble until somebody treats you like a servant. Everybody says, I want to be a servant until somebody treats you like a servant. And in some respects, the cross teaches us a lot more than just the theological truth of the fact that Jesus died for our sins. Yes, it's such a powerful thing. And I continually am wowed about how Scripture kind of pivots on the fulcrum of the cross. Everything's pointing to it and referring back to it as well. It's beautiful. Let's, if we can, maybe focus on a couple of the prayers in the New Testament. I've sort of already alluded to one there in Matthew, but also in day 308, for example, godliness. And again, if I'd guessed, I would have thought that one on godliness, you might have used 1 Peter, but instead you used 1 Timothy. True godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. And Paul, in another place, says, I've learned to be content. And that tells me, Mary, that sometimes contentment is a learned device, a learned virtue. It's not something that is natural. Anybody that doubts that, just stand near the checkout line where there's a lot of candy and a mother that has a couple of toddlers, and you can see that contentment is not our natural default setting, is it?
No, I really wish it was, but it's not. I do believe that that this idea of gratitude and contentment is a huge hallmark of our walk with Christ. Is it increasing? That's a question we can ask ourselves, especially as we go into 2018. How is my gratitude quotient? How am I looking to be content with what I have today and quit trying to, scramble and look for what I do not have?
Very good. One of the other ones you had was persecution, and we've talked about this some with Johnny Moore, as well as with a variety of other guests that have been on the program here that have all sort of reminded us that persecution takes place around the world. But even if we don't face persecution with a capital P, we certainly face persecution with a lowercase p. And again, from 2 Timothy, everyone who wants to live a godly life, which we were just talking about a minute ago, in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. And so that's another one of those reminders in Scripture that we need to begin to think about, right?
I've always marveled at that verse, and it has always struck me. It's so nonchalant. It's like, yeah, by the way, if you're really following Christ, don't be surprised it's going to happen. And, we hear in Peter about the fiery trials and don't be surprised and all of that. It's just so important that we realize this is normative for the Christian life, but because we live in a nation of affluence, sometimes we think that it's weird when it happens, but it should just be normative. Like, yeah, you'll be persecuted because you're in a system that's different. You're in the kingdom of God system, not the world system, and the world is not going to like it.
One of the other ones you talked about is pleases, and that is, finally, dear brothers and sisters, we urge you in the name of the Lord Jesus to live in a way that pleases God as we have taught you. You live this way already, and we encourage you to do so even more. You think about the Westminster Shorter Catechism, what's the chief end of man, to please God and to love him forever. And there's a sense in which that's something we've sort of missed in some of our modern day theology. We will teach it when we get to 1 Thessalonians maybe or a few other passages, but we need to talk about the fact that it's back to this idea of godliness and living a godly life, that we really need to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord.
Yeah, that's out of fashion though, Kerby. It's so frustrating. I see that a lot in people who go down a slippery slope of kind of picking and choosing verses of Scripture that they want to believe in, and yet what really is the hallmark besides joy and contentment, which we've talked about, and gratitude, is holiness. And boy, that's a hard thing to talk about in today's day and age, where we really like relativism, or we like to look exactly like the world, but adding Jesus in here and there and sprinkling him. But if you look at his interaction with the woman caught in adultery, and we all know this, he said, go and sin no more. But we concentrate on him writing in the sand and people walking away, but we forget his final words to her were, stop it and live a life of holiness. And of course, we can't do that on our own. We need the Spirit to do that. But it's such an important issue, and it's just not being talked about a lot today in church about our own pursuit of holiness.
Well, again, the book is entitled Jesus Every Day, A Journey Through the Bible in 1 Year, Prayers to Awaken Your Soul. But let me, Mary, for just a few minutes, talk about what's on your website, Mary DeMuth, because there's a place where it says, Mind If I Pray For You, a free personalized opportunity right there, prayer every Monday for a year. So talk about if people go to your website, and we have a link on our website here, marydemuth.com, what's available for people in terms of prayer, but also in terms of your books and speaking and other resources.
Yeah, so that one I'm really excited about. So if you feel like your Mondays need a boost, which I think most of us do, I will send you a prayer every Monday for a year with your name in it. And so you just simply sign up and just give your email address. And, of course, you have to say your name, unless if you want to, make up a name, you can do that. But it will be less personal that way. And, you'll get a taste of what this book is about, because the book is not – it's kind of the opposite of Jesus Calling. So in Jesus Calling, Jesus says stuff to you. In Jesus Every Day, it gives you the words and the metaphors and the pictures to pray back to Jesus based on Scripture. So you're learning how to deepen your walk with God, and you're also learning how to pray the Scriptures back to the Lord. So it's kind of a different concept, kind of the exact opposite of Jesus every day. And then in terms of my website, yeah, there's just all sorts of stuff there that's free and interesting things about some of my topics of speaking, and I have a podcast there that you can listen to where there's stories. And I need to get you on there, Kerby, because you have a great story.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, it's marydemuth.com. It's part of Restory. And if you wanted to know a little bit more, we have that link on our website, pointofview.net. Mary DeMuth, Happy New Year, and thank you for writing the book.
Thanks so much.
We will take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, for a few more minutes in the second hour, I might mention that Gene McGuire will be in studio with us as we talk about his book, Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption. Here is an individual back in 1977, when he was 17 years of age, sentenced to life in prison on a second-degree murder charge, and interestingly enough, becomes a Christian, and then is actually released after almost 35 years and has had a dynamic ministry first in the prison and now outside of the prison. And he was unfairly accused, and nevertheless, because of a very significant error, which we'll get into in the second hour, was spending all his time behind bars. So we'll talk about that and, of course, hear his story, and I know it will be a source of real encouragement to many of you. Just before we wind down this first hour, let me mention one of the articles I've posted here, and it's by David French. Now, I find myself continuously posting articles by David French. Now, this happened long before he was in studio with us a couple of weeks ago. As I mentioned to him at the time, I think I'd come up with about 45 different articles we'd posted since March of last year. So I think the reason is, first of all, he is a Christian. He's worked in Christian ministry. He's really trying to look at issues from a Christian point of view. And his question in this particular article that we've posted, and I would encourage you to read it in its entirety, but also maybe post it on a Facebook page or a Twitter page or send it to some people. Can America survive as a post-Christian nation? Now, if you've ever listened to me speak about America's godly heritage, you know that whether you've heard me in person or even on the radio, oftentimes as we go through all of this evidence for the fact that there really was a Christian foundation for America, I always end with a line that I think I borrowed it from James Reston. I can't even remember exactly who, but it was just a real simple line, and that is, for any fair-minded individual looking at some of these facts, they would recognize that Christianity was so important in the founding of this republic. I think most people would agree that. I mean, I recognize some secularists that want to pervert history, but most people say, yeah, I think Christian ideas certainly were very important in the founding of this republic. If they were so important in the founding of the republic, why is it so many people today believe that it's not important in the maintenance of this republic? And this is sort of the question that David French is asking. He said, if I had to pick one of the most underappreciated and underreported stories of 2017, it would be that a post-Christian America is a more vicious America, and that the triumph of secularists is rendering America more polarized, not less. He says, remove from the public square biblical admonitions such as love your enemies, and hatred has more room to grow. When the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control wither, then the culture is far more coarse. Now, he says not everybody's missing the story, of course. He talks about Russ Dueffet as well as the Peter Beinart's article in The Atlantic. He says they've written about that. Beinart's conclusion is, for years, political commentators dreamed that the culture war over religious morality that began in the 1960s and 1970s would fade. It has. And the more secular, more ferocious national and racial culture war that has followed is worse. This is for a person writing in The Atlantic, not necessarily a person that would be able to sign the doctrinal statement of your church, for example. But David French goes on and said, in spite of these alarms, much of the elite media celebrates religious decline without seriously and realistically grappling with the consequences. There was so much underlying ignorance and hostility towards Orthodox Christianity in elite media circles that I fear they're still trapped in the false belief that less Christianity means a better America. But remember that just a day or two ago, I actually posted a commentary that had to do with Jeremiah Johnston's book on Unimaginable, which is, again, making the case that where would this culture be without Christianity? Well, it wouldn't be this culture that we enjoy now. And again, David French says that much of this ignorance and hostility is rooted in the idea that Christianity itself is the source of contemporary cultural conflict. In reality, a propensity towards division and conflict is deeply embedded in human nature. Tribalism reigns in the human heart. Religious differences can be, of course, a source of conflict, but a common Judeo-Christian culture also serves the invaluable purpose of providing rules and norms for controlling that conflict and creating the conditions for reconciliation. Yes, some quotes from Flannery O'Connor. I'll skip over those in the interest of time to just say that then he reminds us that even in the article that was in The Atlantic by, interesting enough, Peter Beinart, he said the civil rights movement was not only firmly located within the Christian church, it consistently, constantly even, made explicitly Christian appeals to the larger American culture, appeals to moral norms that Americans were supposed to share. The great civil rights leaders weren't inventing a new morality. They were calling Americans to live by the moral norms they had already supposed to uphold. And so then he goes on to talk about how we have sort of changed that dramatically. He talks about some of the young millennial activists. He also talks about the fact that for a lot of the young people today, they've adopted what one individual, Christian Smith at Notre Dame, called MTD, which stands for Moralistic Therapeutic Deism, a vague belief that while God exists, he's not particularly involved in human affairs, merely wants people to be nice and happy. And he says it's a common moral code that applies to the conduct of one's personal affairs, but it is utterly inadequate, however, when it comes to addressing real human conflict and substantial cultural clashes. It provides no systematic moral worldview, and it ultimately leaves judgment of right and wrong to the individual conscience. Indeed, one of the hallmarks of millennial culture is that the failure to be nice is often met with the most brutal of reprisals. It's mandatory even, to be cruel to the cruel and intolerant of the intolerant. And of course, we've talked about this before with our Millennial Roundtable. So he goes on to basically say that, in short, America is in the process of replacing a general worldview that prioritized love, hope, and truth with an individualized moral buffet that prioritizes personal satisfaction. We're giving man back to his human nature, a nature beset by original sin and prone to tribalism. No one should assume that America can survive the change. Well written, and of course I've skipped over lots of paragraphs, so you should read it in its entirety and see if indeed it resonates with you. And it maybe is perhaps the best argument for why we do what we do here at Point of View. We recognize the need for us to speak into the culture, talk about Christian values, share these stories, as we'll be sharing in just a few minutes from Gene McGuire, encouraging you to pray as Mary DeMuth did, and trying to give you some biblical perspective on some of the things that are taking place in the world around you. And so if you value what we've been trying to do for these 45 years, as I mentioned, we had a $45,000 matching challenge. Now it's a $65,000 matching challenge, but we are way behind. So as we go to a break, this is a perfect time for you to take a moment and either go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button there, that banner that says Give Now, and your gift will be doubled. $100 becomes $200, $500 becomes $1,000. If indeed you don't have access to a computer or you'd like to talk to someone, let me give you a number. The order line number is 800-347-5151. You give a one-time gift, but you might also find out about becoming a member of the Truth Team for $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. You can be part of the team where we actually are sending you all sorts of resources that would be helpful to you in your Christian growth. And, of course, if you'd like to write to us, the address is very simple as well. It's Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Now, remember that the last day of the year is Sunday, so it can't be postmarked on Sunday. You could try to get it postmarked on Saturday, but I think that's taking a risk. So why don't you put that check in the mail today? Then you know it's postmarked in 2017. We can count it for you on your taxes, and it will certainly help us to end the fiscal year in the black. We have a very significant need, about $200,000, so we are encouraging you to give generously. And again, visit the website, pointofview.net, or give us a call, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
In the early 1980s, Jim was moved to help women in crisis. The work was hard, but Point of View was there.
Marlon Maddox really provided the example of what could take place when the average individual in the pew stepped forward and used their God-given gifts and talents, as the Good Samaritan did, just to help somebody in need. There was a transformation that really did take place from just being upset about a problem to actively doing something tangible and real about solving the problem.
Your investment in Point of View shapes hearts and minds across the nation, encouraging more Jims to ask God's help to do great things. Shaping a hope-filled future begins with your gift today, a gift that will be matched, doubled, up to $65,000. Be a key to transformation in 2018. Please give at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. You know, if you've listened to this program any length of time, we oftentimes like to tell you a story of salvation. We certainly like to talk about prison ministry. We like to give you some stories that might be of great encouragement to you. And so all of that is going to happen this hour as we are going to be talking about this book, Unshackled: From Ruin to Redemption. It is a story of Gene McGuire. It is an incredible story. I first heard about it through some of the people that were working with Greg Laurie. As a matter of fact, he does the foreword to the book. I've heard about it from a variety of other individuals. I had to get a copy of the book, and we're now going to tell you the story. So first of all, if you'd like to know more about him and about his ministry, we will certainly encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and as you go there, you'll see his picture, and that will take you to genemcguire.org. You don't even know how to spell it. That's fine. We also have information about the book, which is available both in hardcover and in Kindle. After you hear the story, you're going to want to get a copy. So, Gene, first of all, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, thank you so much, and you're welcome. And to Steve, who also has connected me with you.
Yes, and just great opportunity. So let's, if we can, tell the story. And I'm sure you've just got tired of telling the story, but take us back to 1977. You're a 17-year-old. I guess maybe tell a little bit of your family background, because that's something really key in the book to explain why you were doing what you were doing that particular night.
Yeah, I definitely was a athlete, a high school sophomore at the time, and I had lettered both in track and field and excelled beyond what I could look back now and see. But I was also grew up in an alcoholic family where alcohol was a staple on our dining room table every day throughout the day, and it was just a way of we used alcohol to cope. And but you know, I was never abused, never neglected. I was, you know, clothes were clean, fed, and all that. But alcohol was really a very destructive force in the family, and I just followed in the suit of drinking and masking some pain and shame and guilt. Also, I had a cousin come from New Jersey. His name was Bobby, and he was my favorite cousin growing up. He would do anything in the world for my mother. And having seen that my mother had gone through some broken relationships, Bobby was a guy that always stepped up and helped up. So I had a lot of respect for him. Well, he came to visit my house in Northeast Pennsylvania, where I lived in Falls, Pennsylvania.
Right.
And one night, everybody went to bed. It was about 10 o'clock. They were all drinking, and everybody went to bed. We stayed, drank. We kept drinking and playing cards, and then my cousin wanted to go shoot pool. And around 11:30 at night, my stepbrother drove us to a bar. My parents said it's too late, but we sweet talked and went out the door. And I always tell wherever I speak, I always tell, if there's parents in here, say you're wiser and smarter than your kids. Don't let your kids
That's for sure.
dictate. And so about 20 minutes into shooting some pool, just having some fun, drinking, my cousin turns to me and says, "I'm going to rob the place." And for me, I knew I was something I would never have thought of, and same with my stepbrother, Sidney. So we decided we were going to leave. You could do it. You could do it by yourself. Basically, our mindset was, you do it. And so we left, and we stood outside a little bit, and he went back in. And when he went back in, he murdered the owner of the bar.
Yes, and you even talk about in the book, wondering, looking over, is she dead? Is she moving? Right. What does a dead person look like? And all of that. Well, then all sorts of things unfolded simultaneously. So talk about that.
I stepped back in the bar and realized that she was murdered. And my cousin said, "Help me find some money." And he found some money in a box, and within about 15 minutes, and off we went to New York City. thought he had a plan. He had a plan. He said he was going to, had some friends up in New York City. So we went to New York City. And while we're there, we just in and out of shooting galleries where he was shooting heroin in his arm. And I was drinking wine, and I was just so lost. And the next day I called family and turned myself in, and I was arrested back in Pennsylvania, turned myself in, and I was arrested and charged with murder.
Yeah.
And my mindset was probably, I'm going to go back and tell the truth. My mother said, tell the truth. And I thought, possibility of going home. And after I gave a statement and told the police, my cousin had remained on the run for another 9 days.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, stand up, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and robbery. And they put cuffs on me, and they fingerprinted me, took my picture, and then took me to a juvenile center where I stayed for 9 months.
Yes.
And while I was at the juvenile center, I was given an attorney, public defender,
and that was part of the problem too, because either he didn't tell you right or you didn't hear right, but it doesn't really make any difference. And you thought a couple of years, and you didn't hear the other part. Explain for just a minute.
Yeah. So after a few visits, the idea was to testify against my cousin, and that was agreeable, and also that I could be out in 10 or 12 years, and so I pled guilty 90 days into my arrest, which is really unheard of today in standards. At least there's a fight. And I waited, and 9 months, 6 months later, 9 months, the day before my 18th birthday, I was at the Wyoming County, my hometown Wyoming County courthouse, and the judge sentenced me to life without the possibility of parole. And I remember hearing that, and I remember my attorney said there's a possibility of that, yes, but you can be out in 10 years. So my mindset was, well, I'll do 10 years. And I get to the state correctional institution in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, where I started my adult correctional facility.
And you told some of the prisoners that, and they're all laughing.
Yeah, I tell them, and they say, how much time you doing, young buck? Because everybody wants to, check who you are. You're a new guy, new fish, and all that. And so I tell them, yeah, I'm doing 10 years. They said, well, you're on the list for lifers. You're on the lifer list like us. You're a lifer like us. You're going to die in here, and you're not getting out. There's no parole. And I was like, well, my attorney said 10. So I get on the phone, and I call my attorney, and I said, I want to go back to court. And whatever that looked like, I want to go back and have a jury trial. And within about 10, 15 minutes, he gave me every reason why not to. And I was just discouraged. I remember hanging up the phone in that counselor's office in the state correctional institution. And I went back to my cell, and I said, I'll just do my time.
Yeah, and the time lasted quite a while because it was almost 35 years. And again, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that because this is part of a book called Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption. Gene McGuire with us, and it's an incredible story. We're only getting started here because we have just now incarcerated him for a life sentence. But again, becoming a spiritual leader with the inmates and things of that nature. And as we go to your website, there's some other resources for people as well. I know that you would love to have people come to some of the events that you're involved with or invite you to speak. And, of course, if they want to get a copy of the book, we've got that information as well on the website, right?
Yes, sir.
So, again, talk about what is available there on the website real quickly.
Well, the opportunity to invite me to come and share this testimony of God's faithfulness. I mean, it's not about it. It doesn't entail crime. It entail, violence in the prison system. And God is able to use that to capture some people's attention. But it's really about God's faithfulness and his trustworthiness. And everybody goes through hard times. But on the website also is the book Unshackled at genemcguire.org. And I always tell people using that medium or that avenue, I'll sign the book. I'll put a personal note, and I tell them it doesn't increase the value if I sign it, but it's also enjoyable to be able to do that for them.
Let's take a break. When we come back, if at any point you'd like to join us, feel free to do so. This may be one where you just want to sit back and listen to the story, but we're going to get into the ministry that he had in the prisons. And as we have talked about this with so many guests over the years, we want to certainly, once again, focus on that. But I also know that this story of redemption would be a real encouragement as we wind down 2017. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, a few months from now, we will know how the Supreme Court will rule in the Colorado cake case involving Jack Phillips. In previous commentaries, I've talked about how this case will certainly have some influence on cases involving bakers, florists, and photographers. Wesley J. Smith, in a recent column, says it will also affect people in the medical field. He believes that it could have an impact on medical conscience rights. He says that the law generally protects medical conscience in the areas of abortion and assisted suicide, though not pharmacists dispensing contraception. But those protections are under intellectual assault in bioethics in preparation for eventual attempts to change the law. People who want to reduce or eliminate medical conscience rights want to replace them with a patient rights approach to health care. In other words, if a medical procedure is legal, then the doctor or nurse must provide the procedure. It wouldn't matter if the doctor or the nurse had a moral or religious objection. According to those who want this new approach to health care, nurses and doctors who cannot comply need to leave the profession. Ezekiel Emanuel was instrumental in crafting the Affordable Care Act, now known as Obamacare. He said as much in the New England Journal of Medicine. He argued that doctors who do not wish to perform elective procedures accepted by the medical establishment have two choices. They can find an area of medical practice where their moral views will not be challenged, otherwise they need to get out of medicine altogether. In the oral arguments in the Colorado Baker case, one of the justices suggested the same thing. If you can't bake a cake for a same-sex ceremony, you need to get out of the baking business. These two statements remind us that we are moving into an era when government officials won't even try to accommodate a person's religious convictions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Gene McGuire, and again, the book is entitled Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption. And I might just mention that as you hear this story, it will be a real encouragement to you, but you might want to pass it on to others. So if you go to our website, you'll see that we have a button there to listen, so you could download a podcast and listen to it again or send it to someone. We have a watch button. You can watch right now since Gene is in studio with us, or else you could go to our YouTube channel later on, Point of View Radio Talk Show, and send it to someone. I think it would be a real encouragement. And Gene, we talked a little bit about the crime that you did not commit, the crime that you were sentenced for life to, because Bobby was the one that killed the woman, not you. But the other part of this book that might be helpful to our listeners before we get to your testimony and your salvation is just what it was like to be in prison. And at the age of 18, you're probably seen it with a set of eyes that most of us could not even have imagined. And for just a minute, talk about what prison life is like and what you encountered when you finally walked into that yard.
I had asked questions while I was in the juvenile center about the prison system, and also had my cousin had been in prison prior and had been out, and so I asked him, but everything I had heard, there was nothing to prepare me for the coldness and the violence and the separation that you feel when you walk into the place. And so right away there's bantering going on, there's this challenge going on, and everybody's kind of establishing themselves and trying to, the macho thing, and so I get in there and I run into my first fight, when a guy calls me gorgeous, and I feel my manhood is threatened, and my life and my liberty is threatened, and I get into a big fight with him, and then it actually ends pretty well after about a month. I had established myself in the sense that I wasn't going to be a pushover. So I ended up getting a job. You know, you go to work, and there's job opportunities. Not everybody has a job because there's not enough. Just like in society, some parts of society, there's unemployment, but most people will work in a trade, whether it's welding, janitorial, hospital, commissary. There's auto shop. There's many, as many as you can think of. And so you go to work, from 8 to 4.
I think your first job was welding, wasn't it?
It was a welding, yeah. And I kind of faked my way into it. I had done a little welding in high school, and the guy, they had signed it to me, and the guy said, "Can you weld?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I can weld." And I just hoped that what I did in high school was able, and actually was my first project was the screen. I didn't know it. The screens that were on the buses to transport inmates, and I've learned later, that's what I designed, or that's what I built and welded. So I did that, and then I worked in the hospital as an orderly for 4 or 5 years. Worked in the commissary, which provides toiletries and some snacks and
that
cigarettes.
That was one of the best jobs out there.
One of the best jobs, yeah, one of the more favorable jobs that people would want, and it's limited to about 5 guys, and you have to be trusted to go in there, and so I did that for a while.
And I learned something from the book that the job you don't want is the kitchen, right?
And the kitchen
I
is...
had never even thought about that, because not that I'm planning on going to prison, but ever was, I can do something there. But apparently there's a reason why most people, some will even go to solitary confinement rather than be assigned to kitchen duty. Talk about that.
So there are a few jobs in the kitchen that people like, mainly the cooks or in the back of the kitchen, but mainly... There's just a lot of downtime while you're there, 6-8 hours. You're pretty much a server in that sense. But people like a little bit more freedom or a little bit more of a challenge. And so I had a friend of mine, Scott Doherty, and love him so much. He's still incarcerated. He works for the chaplain now at Rockview. But he had come out of the hole, and they wanted to assign him the kitchen, and he said no. And they said, "Okay, go back to the hole." And he goes back to the hole, and 30 days later, they bring him out for review. They said, "We're going to assign you to A block, work in the kitchen." He's like, "Nope, not going." They said, "Take him back for 60 days." And they took him back 60, and they brought him back out again or whatever it was. And they said, "Okay, you can get your whites and start working." He said, "Nope." And they said, "Take him back for 90. He said, "Where do I pick up my whites?" So he went to work in the kitchen, but it's not one of your more favorable places because of the time you spend there inside the kitchen, and there's not a whole lot of work going on at that time. So,
talk about this for just a minute. I want to help our listeners recognize that if they're going to deal with those in prison that are lifers, what kind of switch in your brain, mindset do you have to create to say, "I'm going to be here the rest of my life"? How did you cope with that, especially at the age of 18?
I think one day at a time, and I say that today with hindsight, but I think it is. You go into a survival mode. I still have family and friends at the time early on. A lot of high school friends, they would write to me, and everybody has a life to live, and they move on. And so after 4, 5, 6 years in the prison system, you're pretty much on your own. You have family members. But you go into a survival mode of like, if I could just get through this day. We have 3 meals, we have a shower, we have some yard, we got a job. If you don't have a GED, I didn't at the time, and I went on and got a GED, a general equivalency diploma. And so you just do the little things consistently, and that's one thing about prison. It's very routine, and you can count on it. The clock clicks and doors open, and the only thing that interrupts it is the violence and the fighting and the stabbings and the upheavals that occur because of pressure.
Some people may not understand this, but I've run into people over the years that when they were in prison, it was an ordered life. And then when they left, they didn't know what to do with all that freedom, and they committed a crime so they could go back to this ordered life. I mean, again, some people can't even imagine why you would want to go back to prison, but for some people it was more security than what they have on the outside, right?
Yes, and I think prison is a very controlled atmosphere, and I had a very wise friend who's dear to me, Larry Titus now. He told me, if you don't learn self-discipline, you'll destroy yourself. He said, because the prison is a very controlled atmosphere. So learn self-discipline.
Well said. Yeah. Well, we got to get you saved here, so let's do that, because this is an incredible story from ruin to redemption, and it's just an incredible story. So see if we can get that in before the next break.
Okay. Attended a 9.5 years into my sentence. Had got caught up in the drugs and the meth and the painkillers. It was something I was looking for to mask some of the pain and shame and guilt, and I found it. And about 2.5, 3 years getting high. Pretty much each week, and somebody invited me to a weekend revival called Prison Invasion 86, and it was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night event, and so I went Friday night, and I walked into this prison chapel, and it was full of about 300 men, and about 100 men from the outside. Music was playing, and hands were raising, and it was just an atmosphere in there that I never even would imagine church was like. A lot of worship and praise and singing. And I heard a pastor speak about the gospel. Jesus died and rose again, and real men make commitments. And one of the things that challenged me was I didn't make a commitment, but it kept saying real men make commitments.
Real men, because you have that in the book. Yeah, go ahead.
And I didn't. And I went back Saturday night, and again, the message, Jesus died, he rose again, and in him there's eternal life. And I knew what it is to do life without parole, but I heard him saying eternal life, and I'm thinking, I really I had friends that were Christians, and I really wanted to know. And at the end, of course, I didn't make a commitment. But at the very end of the service, a man walks up to me and says, "Have you made a commitment tonight?" And I was like, I cannot get away from this. And I said, no. And I asked him, I said, "Are you a Christian?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Well, how long have you known Jesus?" He said, "Since I was 4 years old." I said, "You know Jesus since you're 4?" And he says, "Yeah, at 5, God called me to be a missionary." And he said, "Wait right here." And he left. He came back. He gave me his business card, and his name was Pastor Larry Titus. He had a church, Christ Community, about a mile or so from the prison. And he said, "If you need shoes, money, a book, you need a Bible, you need someone to talk to, give me a call." And it just kind of blew me away that this guy doesn't know that I'm a lifer. He doesn't know that I'm putting a needle in my arm shooting meth. He doesn't know that I'm caught in pornography. He doesn't know that I'm a mess. And he just offered me everything, and he says, "Just give me a call." Well, I didn't make a commitment tonight. I go back Sunday morning, challenged, my hands sweating, stomach churning, and I heard gospel, Jesus died and rose again. And this time was something different. I believe that he did it, but I believe he did it for me, and I needed that. And that's when I went up front. I got on my knees, and they led me through a sinner prayer. Simple as this: Jesus, come into my life, set me free, forgive me for my sins. And I was set free.
We're going to take a break, and there's a lot more to tell, and it's all part of the book Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption. Gene McGuire in studio with us. I would encourage you to watch it and to pass it on to others. And don't forget, as we come to year end, we're also encouraging you to help us out. A gift that you give to this ministry will be double because we have a $65,000 matching challenge, and so please take the time to go to the website pointofview.net, or of course the order line number if you'd like to talk to someone off air and make your pledge, 800-347-5151. We have a lot more to talk about, the ministry that Gene had in the prisons and the ministry he has now. All that coming up right after these important messages.
In the early 1980s, Jim was moved to help women in crisis. The work was hard, but Point of View was there.
Marlon Maddox really provided the example of what could take place when the average individual in the pew stepped forward and used their God-given gifts and talents, as the Good Samaritan did, just to help somebody in need. There was a transformation that really did take place from just being upset about a problem to actively doing something tangible and real about solving the problem.
Your investment in Point of View shapes hearts and minds across the nation, encouraging more Jims to ask God's help to do great things. Shaping a hope-filled future begins with your gift today, a gift that will be matched, doubled, up to $65,000. Be a key to transformation in 2018. Please give at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Gene McGuire, who's in studio with us. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. That's probably be one where you just want to sit back and listen, but perhaps you want to share your own story of ministering in prisons. And if you'd like to do so, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. The book is entitled Unshackled. The foreword by Greg Laurie, as well as other endorsements by James Robison, who's been on the program with us, and a variety of others. And you mentioned Larry Titus, there he is one of the endorsers as well, and many other people that we've had a chance to interview here on the program. Okay, Gene, we got you saved, but I want to talk about all the ministry that you did then for almost 30 years as well, 20 plus years in which you are in prison now, because now you've gone forward, you've accepted Jesus Christ. Talk about your Christian growth and the ministry that you had there.
Absolutely. Larry Titus, as he said, he started to visit me, and he would visit me on Monday, and whatever he taught his church on Sunday, he would come in and recap some of his sermon. he would buy me lunch and a soda, whatever we talk. He'd tell me a funny story, a testimony. He was very testimonial, you know, and it was like Jesus in shoe leather. And one of the things that he like really instilled was discipleship. And so as I was being discipled, it was just natural to disciple other men. And so whatever I learned, I would pass on. You know, I really would. I would go back and I would read it, study it, memorize it, and then I would try to teach it to other men and whoever God put in my life, you know. And at first I was always looking around and saying, I want to see that guy get saved. I want to get, and there was always guys around me. And the Lord says, I put people around you, work with them. And so it was kind of those lessons that I learned that was really good. And we would meet in the yard. We would gather with no real plan other than just get together, and we would read a couple verses. Sometimes I'd put a little Bible study together. Sometimes I would share testimony or something I read. I started becoming really a big reader on books, and so I whatever I learned, I would just share with other men. And we would see guys get saved. We'd see guys get healed. We'd see guys turn their hearts around. We'd see guys come back to the Lord. There's a lot of men in the prison system who tagged along in church. They know church really well. Some had made a commitment and fallen away or whatever they did. But so we saw a lot of men get restored, and we saw marriages, guys that, wives left and came back. It was just about prayer. And so that's what we did. But we'd always be faithful, go to church on Sunday, and we'd have our fellowship. And then every now and then there'd be a special services. But the main ministry was really going on in the prison cells and in the yards, and so that's what we did.
Interesting. Now, talk about how that relates to, first of all, what was happening inside the prison, because you had church services and chaplains, and then those outside that as well. What how did that all come together? Because I know as we go to some of the phone calls here, someone want to talk about, okay, as an outsider, what can I do to help you if you're already doing ministry?
Yeah, there's definitely there's Yoke Fellowship. There's a lot of ministries that come in, and they come in on Monday or Wednesday or whatever. They come in and they share from the outside. And I think one is that they're equipping with good doctrine, because without good doctrine, it's a messed up life.
Right.
And so that's essential, and that's helpful. The other thing is there's a lot of men leaving the prison system. And they need home plans, they need job plans.
That's true. Very true.
That's a big thing. We could, I counted myself as someone who can prepare men to be released, but then a lot of times they would be released and there was nobody out there for them. Mm-hmm. Twofold. One is that they may not have reached out and built bridges and networked as they should have for over the years, apologizing and all that. And I always encourage men, while you're here, build relationships with your family, build relationships with your community, because you're going to go back there. And the other thing is sometimes people are just really hands off. If you say have a felony, they're hands off, and that's a shame. But that's the reality of our world.
Yeah, let's take some phone calls along the way, and we'll head to first South Carolina. Virgil, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Gene McGuire.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on your show. I just wanted to say I commend prison ministry so much. I had an opportunity to do it in the past, and you go in there and you're thinking that you're going to do all this great ministry to these guys that are in prison, incarcerated, and you, in fact, turn around and you're a minister too. I find that to be the case in my life. And I don't think prison ministry gets enough kudos. I don't think the guys that take the time out to go and minister to these guys are spoken of enough. And I believe with all my heart that this is the ultimate turnaround when these guys come to faith in Christ and they're released. They have a new purpose. They have a new desire. And I think that's one of the main things that holds these guys and to keep them out of the prison system once they get out. They're in a relationship with Jesus Christ.
I would agree. That's one of the reasons we've spent some time this year, as you know, talking about that. We had the warden of Angola Prison. We've had individuals with Awana, and, of course, talked about prison fellowship and a variety of others. But what about that? Virgil says, I go in there thinking I'm going to minister to them, and they actually minister to me. What about that?
Well, I had just had the privilege of going back to State Correctional Institution at Gradford in Pennsylvania about 2 weeks ago. I went back in. I did a Friday night service. It was the first prison in Pennsylvania that has opened up in the time that I've released, and I have friends there that I discipled over the years, and they've transferred there, and it's so true. I went in there to share God's faithfulness, and I left, and I these guys are on fire for the Lord. These guys are genuine. They're real, and there might have been 100 men in the prison chapel that night, but they were so on fire for the Lord. And I'm around them, and you could just sense it, and they're for real. And so, yeah, I come away like really pumped up, and I'm thinking, man, these guys are on fire for the Lord.
No, it's just a great story. And again, recognizing that some of them are not only getting GEDs like you did, but getting seminary degrees. And then some of them are actually able to go out and minister and then come back in. And it just occurs to me, we've got you in prison. Now we need to get you out. And that's an incredible story. And then also I want to talk about going back to the tavern and some of those things. But you had no expectation of ever leaving the prison except in a body bag. But some things changed that gave you the opportunity that after almost 35 years, you were released. Talk about that.
After being denied 5 times through the governor's board of pardons, I just remember going back to my cell broken and I knew I'm going to die in this place, and kind of reconciled with God, tears, and put the pillow in my face. And I just started saying thank you to the Lord for saving me and having a plan for my life and protecting, providing, and promoting me. And when I finished, just listen to the Lord. He said, I'm going to release you. Well, I stood up and I said, what do I do now, Lord? He said, go back to serving, go back to work. And I did. And 2 months later, there was a new law that came out called Graham versus Florida in May of 2010, dealt with juveniles, and it dealt with juveniles who received life sentences without the possibility of parole, who did not kill, who did not intend to kill, who did not know it. And it was applicable to me, plus 479 other inmates. So everybody started filing their appeals. We had some help from a Philadelphia attorney, Bradley Bridge, who initiated it and helped us along, but he couldn't represent us. So I filed my appeal, my post-conviction with the courts, my home, and it was granted. And not only granted, but they gave me an attorney to overlook my case. And within about a year, it took about a year, my attorney said, what did your attorney do for you? And I said, this. He said, no, what did he do for you? And I said, well, he said, no, he didn't do anything for you. He pled you into an illegal plea agreement. He, led you in an unconstitutional sentence. And he said, but we need the courts to take a look at it. And so it took about 22 months to go back into court. And I found myself on April 3rd, 2012, shackled and chained with an orange jumpsuit on and standing before the judge. And it was a small hearing. They had already ruled my life sentence was unconstitutional. They threw that out a few months earlier. But I opened myself up to any sentence they would give me. I felt like I was a servant of the Lord. I knew I was a son of God. I knew who I was, my identity, but I also, my attitude was that I was a servant of the Lord and I had no rights. And I just said, whatever sentence you want to give me, I'll take. And so at that moment, the judge sentenced me to 34 years, 9 months, and 15 days time served, and I was released effective that day. So, I mean, everybody's crying and clapping and applauding and hallelujah. And I had a courtroom full of people, friends that I had just built relationships with, because God told me one time when I was in a prison, said, Gene, relationships are more important than your projects.
That's right.
And so I was released, and someone yelled, unshackle him, release him from his chain. And so they came over. Yeah, they came over and they unshackled me, and my sister's climbing over a chair to get to me, and the sheriff's saying, hold on, Mary, hold on. And she goes, no.
She goes, I waited.
Yeah, I waited so long. I waited. So next thing you know, it was surreal. I was released, and they handed me some clothes. They said, Gene, you're free to go. Mary, take your brother home. And so that began the process of walking out of that courtroom as a free man. And
well, and again, we've got some pictures of that in the book. So again, as you get the book, it's going to be fascinating to read because it's 270 plus pages, but the pictures in there will give you an idea of what it looked like that day. And when we come back, I want to talk about the fact you went back to that tavern. You actually ran into the judge, and there's some really interesting stories there as well. All part of the book called Unshackled, From Ruin to Redemption. If you'd like to know more about Gene McGuire or the book, we have all of that at our website. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what's available through him and his ministry right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 1919, American mothers who lost their sons in World War I set about developing a war memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland. And there it has stood in peaceful silence for over 90 years, a visible reminder of the cost of freedom. But in October of 2017, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reasoned that because these mothers chose to memorialize their sons with a cross-shaped monument reminiscent of the grave markers of the thousands of American soldiers buried across Europe, the monument violates the Constitution. Not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory issued a strong dissent, reminding the court that the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment does not require the government to purge any reference to religion from the public square. He concluded, quote, "This memorial stands in witness to the valor, endurance, courage, and devotion of the 49 residents of Prince George's County, Maryland, who lost their lives in the Great War for the liberty of the world. I cannot agree that a monument so conceived and dedicated and that bears such witness violates the letter or spirit of the very Constitution these heroes died to defend," unquote. We agree with Judge Gregory. This is a veterans memorial. We will not break faith with the Gold Star mothers and the American Legion veterans who chose to remember their sons and brothers with this cross-shaped memorial. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gene McGuire in studio with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Unshackled. And again, we've taken some of your phone calls, but if you didn't have a chance to get through, let me just mention that we have a link to his website. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, because if you would love to have him come and speak to your group, he certainly can do that. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, we've made that available as well. And, of course, I might just mention that after you got out, there are all sorts of opportunities. One is you're the chaplain to one of these wonderful family-owned restaurants, which is called Babe's Chicken Dinner House. And so that's one of the things you do. But let's, if we can, talk about what happened when you got out, because eventually you said, I need to go back to that tavern where this crime was committed. And then you ended up running into the judge. Tell us some of those stories.
Well, one of the things was I began writing, the book was being written, and people said, you know, the Darren Shaw, who was helping me, and Richard Harmer, who was also helping me with some of the media, had asked me, have you ever gone back? And right away I was thinking, you know, it's kind of holy ground. I don't deserve to be there. But it was something that we needed to do, I think, and so we went back.
He helped you go through that.
Yeah, we walked through it and went in and kind of
kept asking you, "Are you okay? You okay?"
Yeah, and we walked back in, and not much has changed. Be honest with you, it's right there at Lake Winola. But you know, I still today it's just a place that you know, I don't feel worthy of being there. You know, it's just one of those things.
That. So certainly do that.
And then we went back, and I had always gone back for many years. Every time I go back to Pennsylvania to my family, I go back to the courthouse and update Jim Neary and Cindy Harvey, all the folks there in the courthouse.
Right.
They're always interested in what I'm doing, especially with Babe's Chicken Dinner House, you know, working as a pastor. And I'll go back, and I've always wanted to meet the judge, and of course he's busy in court. But we were leaving one day, and we were getting on the elevator, and who turns the corner but Judge Shurtleff. And I looked at him and I thought, oh my goodness. And so he looked straight faced, stern, and I almost like swallowed real hard. Is he happy to see me? Is he not? Does he have regrets? And the next thing you know, he reached out his hand and shook my hand and said that it was the best decision that he's made, and that he's happy. And I'd written to him and kept up, let him know what I was doing and where I was at, and that in the sense that I want you to know that your decision to release me is a good decision, and I'm successful and fruitful and impacting other people's lives.
Well, again, just incredible stories there. We talked about Babe's Chicken. First of all, you got to go there,
absolutely.
And Greg Laurie goes there every time he comes into Dallas, so that shows you something right there.
Greg Laurie.
But talk about where you are now, and most importantly, we have a link to your website. People don't have to even know how to spell Gene McGuire because we've got the link right there, but if you go there, you will find all sorts of information. Let's talk about what you're doing right now and how people can connect up with you.
Well, just reach out to me, even gene4192@gmail.com or my website. I've been speaking at companies throughout Dallas, and also high schools have been opening up. I was in Arkansas. I've been in Pennsylvania. I'll be going back. Youth for Christ. Just amazing. What a privilege to be invited to come and share about God's faithfulness and the journey that I took. But here in Dallas, I work for Babe's Chicken Dinner House with the Vineyard family, and they're a family-owned Christian business, and they see their business as a ministry to reach the military, to reach young people, and we have 900 young people working for us, and Paul Vineyards and Tiffany and Joel Vineyard, they just love on people, and I just come alongside with another pastor called Chris Bear, named Chris Bear, is a best friend of mine. And we just serve in the restaurant business. I walk in, someone says, how does that work? And I said, well, basically I pray in the morning, Lord, use me. I just, set up divine appointments and divine opportunities. And when I walk in, the managers, they're like, hey, we have somebody here that's hurting.
Yeah.
Hey, we need someone in the hospital. Hey, there's someone in the hospital. Can you talk to them? And so I'm just available, and I'm a resource for them, but I'm just carrying out the will basically of the Vineyard family. In a sense, it's God's will, and I'm just pleased to walk with them and to help them out.
You've got a chapter here about divine appointments, one of which we just talked about a few minutes ago, your release, but also just the divine appointments we have here as well. If people go to the website, one of the things they're going to find is that you have the hardback book, and as you said, you'd be glad to sign it if people wanted to do that. And, of course, they can find out a little bit more about other ways in which they can connect up with you. But, again, the website, you've got a blog, you've got speaking, you've got, of course, material for the book, contact information if people want to call you or email you. So talk about how someone might be able to use you in their ministry, or maybe if they want to kick off a prison ministry or get some advice on that. What's available through you?
Well, we just did an event in Pennsylvania up in Bradford County where Denny Vermilia, he organized, he said, hey, can you be available? I'm like, I'm available. And so he went and connected with a couple of churches and a couple of schools, and he brought in a Commandment 11, and we did a couple concerts, and we did some testimonies. We also did some prison ministry. So for that weekend, it was kind of come spend a weekend with Gene McGuire. And so we went into the prisons, we went into the schools, and we just shared. We kind of just created an opportunity to share the good news with as many people as we can. And one of the things that, in the business sector, there's some broken hearts and disappointments, and so in the business realm, people are impacted with the story, but they're also in the schools. Because I was 17, they can relate to that, and they just kind of swarm afterwards. And they have dads in prison, brothers in prisons, or they're caught up in addiction. A lot of people, and so the story is really touching a lot of lives from different dimensions. And so my encouragement is, if we could do something, let's partner. And I have a couple ideas, and if you have some ideas, let's start praying about it.
Well, again, thank you for writing the book, and thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
You are welcome to everybody here on your show, and Kerby, thank you so much.
Again, Gene McGuire, the book is entitled Unshackled from Ruin to Redemption, And these are the kind of empowering and encouraging stories that are part of what we do here at Point of View. It's not the only thing. Of course, we really want you to help think about biblical issues and to think about contemporary issues from a biblical point of view. So we really want you to be able to articulate a biblical worldview, to know how to defend it, and certainly to be encouraged by some of the stories that we've been sharing with you today. So if that is something that you value, and I hope that you do, let me encourage you as we are coming to the second to the last program of 2017 that we really need to hear from you. If you've been waiting to the 11th hour, it is the 11th hour, so we certainly need to hear from you. So even though we're going off the air, you can still call our order line number. That is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. You can also, of course, go to the website, pointofview.net, and we have a banner there that reminds you that we have about $65,000 in a matching challenge that is still available, and we still desperately need your financial support. A lot of people have been saying, how you doing? We're way behind, so that's why we need to hear from you, and anything you can do to help us would be greatly appreciated. We've talked about also the fact if you want to give appreciated stock, you better do it now because you're not going to be able to do it over the weekend, and so that's another way you can support this ministry. And as I've said before, you might want to give a one-time gift, but some of you might want to just, as we get into 2018, join with us in the Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. You're part of the Truth Team. We will send you, of course, our Outlook magazine, all sorts of other great resources. And at the $45 level, which is tied into the fact we've been broadcasting for 45 years, we send all sorts of booklets and other resources as well that you might want to get a copy of. So all of it is available at the website, pointofview.net. And if you'd like to write to us, don't forget our address is Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Tomorrow is our weekend edition. I look forward to that opportunity. Hope you'll join us then. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition.
In the early 1980s, Jim was moved to help women in crisis. The work was hard, but Point of View was there.
Marlon Maddox really provided the example